Tao and the Cosmic Principle. Chapter 1. Consciousness and Science. Ancient Wisdom and the Quantum Hypothesis. The Wisdom of Ancient Natural Philosophers. Eratosthenes and the World's First Measurement of the Size of the Earth. Now, let me tell you a little about an experience from my childhood. This is a tale of the greatness of the ancient Greeks. This is a story from when I was in elementary school. It was explained on a TV show that there was a man in ancient Egypt who measured the size of the earth by looking at the shadows created in wells. I could not understand what it meant at the time, and when I told my homeroom teacher about it at school the next day, he said it was nonsense and that I must have misheard, which made me feel very disappointed. Unlike today, it was not possible to do a quick and easy search on the internet. Because I was in the countryside, there was no such thing as a library, and it was impossible for me to learn more than that. Had my science major homeroom teacher given me a sincere answer at the time, I would doubtless have become fascinated by mathematics. It really is a pity because I would have been able to learn a lot more. Had I been able to use that lost time, I might have been working in astrophysics now. The man of this period was Eratosthenes, 275 BC to 194 BC, a Greek living in ancient Egypt during the Hellenistic period, when the Eastern and Western civilizations traded with one another. Ptolemy III appointed him as the third director of the Library of Alexandria in 236 BC, and he held this position for more than 30 years. He became blind around 195 BC and died the following year at age 82, opinions vary. He is said to have committed suicide by starving himself to death following the loss of his eyesight. He was the genius who devised the sieve of Eratosthenes, a method for finding prime numbers. Moreover, this great man was the first scientist to apply mathematics to geography and cartography. And in his book on the measurement of the earth, he calculated the circumference of the earth to a high degree of accuracy for his time. That method of measurement is as follows. At that time, he lived in the city of Alexandria, located at the mouth of the Nile, where it meets the Mediterranean Sea, and it was known that each year at noon on the day of the summer solstice in the town of Syene, Aswan today, to the south of the city, the sun would shine down to the bottom of a well, and no shadows would form. Coincidentally, the town is located exactly on the Tropic of Cancer, meaning that the sun passes directly overhead on the day of the summer solstice, and so at noon the angle of the sun was 90 degrees, with the sunlight reflected by the water at the bottom of that deep well. The distance from Alexandria to Syene was approximately 5,000 stadia, 925 kilometers. Therefore, to accurately measure the angle of the sun at Alexandria that same noon, Eratosthenes positioned a tall pole, measuring the angle of the sun from the length of its shadow, and determined it to be 82.8 degrees, 7.2 degrees off from that of Syene. This also meant that the earth was round. This had been known to the Greeks from around the 6th century BC, but Eratosthenes confirmed this to be the case. Then, taking the earth as a sphere, he divided the 360 degrees of the circumference by 7.2 to obtain 50. In other words, a distance of 7.2 divided by 360 of the earth's circumference, 1/50th, was 5,000 stadia, or 925 kilometers. Eratosthenes thus calculated the distance around the earth as 5,000 stadia, 925 kilometers, times 50 equals 250,000 stadia, 46,250 kilometers. Moreover, using this figure he calculated the earth's diameter as 250,000 stadia, 46,250 kilometers, divided by pi, 3.14, equals 79,618 stadia, 14,730 kilometers, and thereby derived a figure of 39,809 stadia, 7,365 kilometers, for its radius. The accuracy of the figure he derived, with an error of 15.6%, is astonishing, since the actual value for the circumference of the earth is 40,000 kilometers. This error was caused by differences in the skill of the expert walkers, who measured the distance to Syene. The equation itself was perfect. That these formulas had already been discovered at that time is a marvel. This was the great achievement of Eratosthenes, who was the first in human history to calculate the size of the earth. In hindsight, It was a very simple calculation, but it was a watershed at the time. The mistaken notion that ancient peoples were primitive. For you to ask people today whether they could measure the size of the earth for themselves, few could answer right away. It is a wonderful thing that in ancient Greece, scientists like Eratosthenes, natural philosophers, loved and studied nature and developed mathematics. Their inquisitive spirit was pure, and I think somewhat different from that of scientists today. That is, they seem to have had an eye for deeper insights, rather than mere observation, or a spirit of intellectual inquiry into nature. It could perhaps be described differently as a sense of reverence toward nature. In a broad sense, it was a religious view. That is, they combined both the eyes of scientists and the eyes of believers. There was no contradiction in their ideas, the two were compatible. This overlap is hard to conceive of and is not found among the majority of scientists today. There is a certain notion among people today that is difficult to contest. It is the civilizational belief that the ancients were primitive, while modern man is intelligent and brilliant. This is certainly true of our sciences. Comparing individuals one-on-one, however, it would be false to say that we are superior to people from ancient times. Nobody understands Pythagoras' theory of geometry unless they learn it at school. In terms of character, there is a greater issue. The Bible and the Analects of Confucius are still being read, and are the pillars of the spirits of modern man. In other words, this means modern man is no more than ancient man in terms of his character. Quantum mechanics has only just caught up with the Buddha's, Kugun, doctrine of emptiness. Even science has been outdone by one individual, the Buddha. This is a remarkable fact. In this way, the hubris of modern man must be corrected. I feel modern man should respect the wisdom of thousands of years of history, or, at least, be more humble. This is how humanity has built its wisdom. Over 2,500 years, geometry has developed, and further mathematics and physical constants have been discovered, from which natural sciences such as astrophysics and quantum mechanics have been created. Cutting-edge theories and discoveries in astrophysics and quantum physics have given rise to parallel universes and a multiverse, and they have even developed a theory that supposes an anthropic principle of cosmic consciousness. These ideas are stranger and more exciting than reading science fiction novels. I think young people today are truly blessed to have been born in this day and age. It is almost a sin not to study in an environment that is conducive to learning. I cannot help but hope that we will see more outstanding young men and women emerge in the future. Nonetheless, it is nothing short of astonishing that the Buddha derived the ultimate theorem of physics 2,500 years ago and, moreover, demonstrated this not only as knowledge but as the transcendental world of enlightenment. Emptiness and the momentary of generation and annihilation. Emptiness, and the denial of absolutes. I studied Indian Buddhism studies at a Buddhist university and discussed sunyata, denial of individual existence, emptiness, and eon, continuous consciousness, and I am glad to see today that its content accords with what the latest cosmology theory tells us. The fundamental philosophy of the Buddhist doctrine is based on emptiness, and the momentary generation and annihilation. Buddhism teaches that emptiness does not recognize the characteristic of individuality in anything that exists and repudiates its absoluteness. This is called mujisho, niḥsvabhāva, naturelessness. This is also synonymous with engi, pratītyasamutpāda, relationships in which fixed entities are not recognized, and all existence is presumed to be interdependent. Buddhism does not recognize the existence of the ego, and denies any constancy that constitutes this world. Things come into being only as a result of causes, and are not separate entities. This is also called muga, anātman, selflessness. Selflessness and naturelessness are synonymous. What is meant by mujisho, svabhāva, nature, is absoluteness. Thus, if one recognizes the absoluteness of nature in the self, there will be nothing else. This is because the absolute is a concept that does not permit the existence of the relative. In other words, absolute means one. As long as there are others, we cannot refer to the absolute, unique, by referring to that. So, if that is the only thing that exists in the world, then it is indeed absolute. Then, were you to ask, if such a thing exists in this world, there is no need to think about it. It does not. This is because this world is a relative world. But is this statement really true? Is there truly such a thing as a relative world? Relative refers to the existential relationship between I and he. In general, we can say that he and I exist relative to one another. However, this expression is actually a logical fallacy. This is because a relative world is impossible. That is to say, relativity is a concept that gives the absoluteness of existence to he and I. That being said, as the reader may understand, the concept of the relative refers to the absolute plurality of existence, and this gives rise to an obvious contradiction. This is because to affirm individual entities is to confer on them the nature of absolute existence. That would contradict the notion of an absolute as unique. As a result, it is established that neither the relative world nor the absolute world is present in this world. In order for the other to exist, it must be relative, but if the self must be absolute as a condition for existence, it will be necessary to deny the existence of all others, resulting in a contradiction, and there can be no selfhood. The relative is also denied, because it is an acknowledgement of the respective self-natures, mujisho, of the self and others. The absoluteness of others, like the absoluteness of the self, is concurrently an error since it denies everything else, and therefore is not valid. In that sense, the Christian God too does not exist. This is because the God of Christianity always positions man and Satan as relative beings. If we try to view God in terms of the concept of the absolute, then we must take everything in this universe to be God. In other words, we must form a concept in which both man and Satan are part of God. This is consistent with the pantheism of the East. At that point, the existence of a personal God would be denied. However, here we are in conflict with another concept of absolute importance. That is, because the absolute refers to absolute and fixed, that does not change at the same time to oneness. In short, it does not permit change. Things that change cannot be called absolute. The meaning of to not betray the absolute is to not permit its contradiction even once. In the same manner, it does not permit the state of affairs to change at all. In that sense, the concept of an absolute God cannot be accepted. That is why Buddhism teaches, Shogyo Mujo, Sab Sankara Anicca, worldly things are impermanent, and, Shoho Muga, Sab Dhamma Anatta, the principle of the existence of this world is selflessness, equals self-naturelessness, and, ku, emptiness. Emptiness is the ultimate dharma, principle, in this world. In that sense, the concept of nirvana, the state of salvation taught by Buddhism, is by far the strangest concept in comparative religion. This is because it does not mean heaven as most religions preach it. The concepts of Jodo, Pure Land, and Gokuraku, paradise, preached by groups such as the Pure Land Buddhist sect were, obviously spoken to ignorant believers, and are not the nirvana that the Buddha preached. It is a non-existent thing. It is an incomprehensible concept and an incomprehensible place, that accepts no concept at all. I understand it relates to the energy of nothingness or fluctuation, which I will discuss in a later chapter. That, hosts show, dharmata, is the form of emptiness, and in this world, it refers only to the relationships as the transference of energy, or interdependence. This is called, engi, pratītyasamutpāda, causation, to occur as a consequence thereof. Buddhism takes as an axiom that there is no self-nature, mujisho, in all beings, that is, nothing exists. In that sense, it is impossible for one to understand nirvana unless one has reached the step before enlightenment. In order to do so, one must abandon all of one's shujaku, abhinivesa, attachments, to be attached to things, to be caught up in them. A captive spirit, considered to be the cause of suffering, it is only when one reaches a near perfect state of unattachment, that nirvana can be perceived. No matter how much scientists use their intellects, they cannot grasp this world of nirvana. In the primordial universe, plasma prevented light from traveling in straight lines, and in the same way, the worldly desires and attachments of scientists prevent their consciousnesses from reaching a higher state of mind. Even if the greatest practitioner comes close to a state of mind that can perceive nirvana, As long as there is even a glimpse of some concept or notion attached to it, it is the subject of emptiness, relativized and denied. Indeed, it can also be said that existence does not arise from existence. Existence does not arise from nothing. Non-existence does not arise from existence. Non-existence does not arise from nothing. If true nature is nothing, mujisho, there is no way true nature can arise in the first place. If true nature is existence, bhava, that is, if there is a self-nature, jisho, to existence, bhava, nothing arises from existence, bhava, because existence, bhava, does not change. This is the world of emptiness. Nagarjuna, who was the next to emphasize this emptiness after the Buddha, said that the ignorant person engages in actions of the various attachments that are the root of the endless circle of birth, death, and rebirth, and showed that denying the attachments that accompany worldly desires for all things leads to enlightenment. Emptiness is exactly the principle of the generation and annihilation of elementary particles that, despite appearing to have substance, have none. That being said, no matter how much one studies physical principles using the methods of scientists, one will never reach enlightenment. This is because the action of their principles is fundamentally different, and because enlightenment is not achieved with the brain, but with the soul, consciousness. The momentary generation and annihilation. The Yuishiki school of Buddhism, properly known as the Yogacara, as its name would suggest, teaches that there is only consciousness. In other words, all worldly phenomena are temporary forms created by the mind and do not exist, only the mind itself actually exists. The school preaches that the world does not exist. This is, however, different from Western idealism, in which the consciousness of Yogacara is ultimately emptied and its existence denied. This is one of the great things about Buddhism, and is an exceedingly difficult thing for a layman to understand. Yuga is the original meaning of so-called yoga. Yuga is fundamentally distinct from what people generally practice as yoga in that yuga pursue moksha, emancipation. The Yuishiki school recognizes existence only in the present moment, not in the past or the future. On the other hand, the most influential of the Buddhist schools, the Sarvastivada school, differs from the Yuishiki school, in that, it teaches a doctrine of three temporal states, past, present and future, exists, but both schools assert, setsuna shometsu, correctly termed setsuna metsu, of time and existence. It says that the repetition of generation and annihilation and generation in each moment, every now, we are aware of our own existence. In this way, there is no acknowledgement of permanent immutability at all. Indeed, Buddhism is very thorough. It is more physical than physics. Incidentally, setsuna, kasana, moment, is a concept of a unit of time that is infinitely short, but it is also said that the time taken to suddenly snap one's finger is 65 moments. Broadly speaking, taking the snap of one's finger to be 1/100th of a second, it would be another 1/65th of that. We exist in the repetition of each of these moments of generation and annihilation. The question arises as to what comes into being and disappears, comes in and out of existence, and these are existence itself, time, and the go-un, 5 skandhas, that constitute a person. The following is a brief explanation. In Buddhism, the laws and principles of this world are known as the Viho, Samskrita Dharma, the law of perpetual change caused by karma. In other words, it is a principle that governs the unenlightened world, and all of things in this world are impermanent in nature. Impermanence means non-constant, which means the momentary generation and annihilation, described here. In Buddhism, time and existence from its arising to its extinction is divided into 4 phases, the 4 stages of existence: generation, continuation, change, and annihilation. Generation means the transition of dharma, principle, from the future to the present. Continuation means the existence, action, of a single short moment of dharma appearing in the present dimension. Change is what mutates from the present, and annihilation means that the dharma perishes in the present phase and passes, shifts, to the past. This is known as the Sansa Jitsu Wu Hat Tai Go Wu. The teaching of the 3 temporal states of reality This is the theory of momentary generation and annihilation asserted by the Sarvastivada. This teaches that the past dharma, present dharma and future dharma exist, which means that the past, present, and future are as real as we feel the present to be. I will discuss this on many later occasions, and it is demonstrated in Einstein's special theory of relativity. In that sense, the Sarvastivada's theory of three temporary states of relativity better accords with modern physics than the Yogacaras' claim that only a moment setsuna of the present exists, the theory that the present exists, but the past and future do not. Like the theory of relativity, Sarvastivada Buddhism regards the past, present, and future as equivalent. Therein, we find a continuous arrow of time from the future to the past or from the past to the future. Moreover, if these have an equivalent relationship, then it logically follows that the future affects the present, and the present affects the past. Normally, causes in the past create effects in the present, and causes in the present create effects in the future. But if the three temporal states are real, then there is an interdependent relationship, and the inverse of these relationships is also possible. This is also what Einstein's theory of relativity claims. What an incredible coincidence that Buddhism and cutting-edge physics align. Furthermore, this theory creates the greatest conundrum of all. Our futures are already determined. If they are determined, then everything in this universe is in accordance with a fixed causal theory. This means that the universe, which at a glance appears to change, is merely a fixed entity. In other words, this is the same as a complete stop in time. If this is the case, existence has no meaning. Even if this world is impermanent and its existence denied, its reality as perpetual change caused by karma can be provisionally recognized, and, to that extent, we can discover some account of existence therein. From this perspective, this must mean that the future dimension contains choices, according to the wills of those languishing in the unenlightenment of the present dimension. That means that there are as many choices hidden as the collapse of wave packets in the quantum physics wave function. Then, the moment of the shift from future to present causes the wave function to collapse, and is transformed into the real self. This point is also consistent with modern quantum theory. Now, there are some things in the future dimension that are confined to the future, and do not manifest themselves in the present dimension. These are direct causes and indirect conditions that have yet to be fulfilled. Moreover, anything related to nirvana will be settled in the future dimension as a dharma without effect. This becomes manifest when a person is emancipated. Momentary generation and annihilation means that there is no substance to existence. I have seen unprocessed images of molecules of platinum, or some such substance, and it looked as though it was partially alive, moving around limply like an amoeba. This is now known as a virtual field. It never retained shape, and was entirely unrecognizable as an individual entity. Just like that, everything in this world, including our bodies, exists in a state of constant change, appearing and disappearing. This has been proven in the present day to be consistent with the laws of physics, which are set out in Chapter 4. Buddhism treats the world as impermanent and teaches that it is not for even a moment permanent. Our present moment is perceived as life in an illusory way. In the next moment, it will become complete nothingness and disappear, and through the repetition of this cycle, we have a sense that it might be perpetual. This means that the law of perpetual change, which is a law of the unenlightened world, appears only momentarily in this present world, and immediately disappears, transitioning to the past. This is just like a frame-by-frame advance in an animation. Each frame is a still image but is given motion by the succession of tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of images, and is transformed into a living image. When speech is added, it becomes completely personified. In fact, Buddhism considers humanity to have the exact same structure. There is no other religion like it. What makes Buddhism so remarkable is that it does not recognize the existence of this continuum. Physics is still in childish pursuit of it, but 2,500 years ago, Buddhism had already gained a sense that this existence can only be inferred as an illusion through dhyana samadhi, his latent nature, dharmakaya, awakened and finally enlightened. You and I are actually uncertain existences. If a person can at least realize that they exist only at a level like that of a frame in an animation, that person has fairly good, shiki, consciousness. That said, from the perspective of emptiness, that consciousness is negated the moment it is expressed as consciousness, and this is what remarkable about Buddhism is. In any case, Buddhist philosophy surpasses physics in this regard. This Buddhist philosophy is entirely in line with modern physics, and, although it is a religion, I feel this is a strong demonstration of Buddhism's great achievements. Thus, despite the emergence of the anthropic principle in physics, physics remains far removed from Buddhist philosophy. This is discussed in greater detail in Chapter 6 under the title, Sansa Jitsu Wu Hot Tai Go Wu. What is the anthropic principle of the universe? When I first learned this term, I was suspicious, and wondered just what on earth physics had to say about it. I would have understood, were it scholarship from the humanities, but in the world of physics, which is based entirely on mathematical formulas and experiments, I was dumbfounded to learn of the development of a theory, that human existence created the universe. The more I read it, however, the more I realized, that scientists were serious about it, and that surprised me further. This theory was first presented in 1961, in a paper titled Anthropic Principle, by American physicist Robert H. Dick. Following the process of the evolution of life, the probability of life occurring is close to zero, because of the large number of consecutive coincidences required. The theory states, that the history of the universe, which began with the Big Bang, was established through an encounter with intelligence, in other words, human beings. It is assumed that this intelligence began to explore the universe, because the universe itself was seeking it. I was utterly stunned by this outrageous opinion, considering that it was an opinion from the standpoint of physics. Scientists, who have been seeking physical constants, finally came to think of the principle of the universe, as some kind of will. However, there was a certain logical development behind it. In other words, the results of Bohr's experiment, in which elementary particles determine their existence depending on the observer's will, along with the development of quantum theory, supported that claim. Quantum theory has its origins in German physicist Max Planck's theory of energy quanta, proposed in 1900. While until then, it had been believed that energy conduction was continuous, he believed it to be discontinuous, and published the groundbreaking theory of energy particles, quanta, as the smallest unit that could not be further subdivided. He showed that energy particles can be counted as one or two, like atoms. This was Planck's quantum hypothesis, which marked the start of quantum theory. This insight raised the curtain on a whole new century. In 1905, said to be a year of marvels, Einstein, a 26-year-old genius who had been greatly influenced by this idea, introduced the idea of light photons, light itself being composed of discrete units of energy, the existence of atoms, and further introduced the theory of special relativity, thus heralding a new era that saw great breakthroughs in the explanation of the universe. Then, the momentary generation and annihilation, that Indian Buddhism has been describing for 2,500 years, becomes clear. Now, in order for you to understand the concept of the quantum, I shall explain with reference to Planck's achievements. The birth of quantum mechanics. Quantum theory. Max Planck's achievements. With reference to Oikawa Wataru's commentary in Dreams of Great Figures on Science Channel, Planck's epoch-making discovery was as follows. Construction of the thermal radiation formula. In the fall of 1900, just before the turn of the 19th century to the 20th century, Max Planck, a professor of physics at the University of Berlin, opened the door to the unexpected world of quanta, through his theoretical pursuit of heat radiation. Objects emit light when heated. What kind of light is distributed at what temperatures, and under what conditions? The study of thermal radiation investigates these relationships. Planck had already been carrying out this research for several years. However, this could not be solved. He wrote, light energy is discontinuous, because it can only take an integer multiple of the minimum unit. Is such a tremendous thing even possible? On December 14, 1900, Planck presented his theory of heat radiation, using this empirical formula to the German Physical Society, Deutsche Physikalische Gesellschaft. However, most of the attendees were uninterested. Even Planck himself could not quantify the significance of this empirical formula. For the subsequent few weeks, he pondered its meaning. One day, he suddenly stopped in the middle of a walk with his son Erwin, and said in a forceful voice, "Erwin, your father has made a huge discovery to rival that of Copernicus." Planck was 42 years old at the time. He is an integral figure to modern physics, particularly when discussing quantum mechanics. Not only his academic achievements, but also his way of living as a person of character, was also highly influential. Einstein's theory of relativity was also named by Planck. Einstein's idea of light quanta was also derived from Planck's idea of energy quanta. Max Planck was born on April 23, 1858, in the town of Kiel, Germany. His grandfather was a theologian, his father was a professor of law, and his mother was the daughter of a pastor. He grew up in such a family environment. Apart from his great history as a physicist, his wife and 2 daughters died early of illness and childbirth. His eldest son perished in World War I, and his second son Erwin, the apple of his eye, was later executed for planning to assassinate Hitler. In this way, Planck lost his entire family. Moreover, he had to bear the tremendous sorrow of losing everything during World War II, including a house full of memories and his papers. Planck's dour demeanor carried signs of this sorrow. At that time, the German Empire was desperate to flourish its industry. Iron production was essential to industry. The quality of iron, produced in a blast furnace, depends upon accurate temperature control. However, no thermometer could measure the several thousand-degree temperature at which iron melts. Therefore, many craftspeople adjusted the temperature by observing the color of the iron being heated. Although temperature control relied on the experience of craftspeople, it was necessary at the time to scientifically understand the relationship between applied heat and the light emitted by iron. To this end, Planck put his greatest efforts at the time into his research into heat. An object emits light when heated, and humans perceive that light as color. This light is called thermal radiation. From the latter half of the 1890s onward, Planck poured his efforts into studying thermal radiation. An experimental device, called a blackbody, was used in his research. A blackbody is a black box that examines the relationship between light, color, and temperature. When heat is applied to this box, light is repeatedly emitted and absorbed by the box. By examining the spectrum of light by temperature, we can determine the frequency and intensity of light present at a given temperature. Planck sought a formula that could explain this emitted light. He formulated a theory and tested it against the results of the experiment, and where the theory did not align, he reconstructed the theory. As a result of repeated trial and error, Planck eventually arrived at an empirical formula, E equals h nu. E represents light energy, and h is a number known as Planck's constant. Nu represents frequency. This equation meant that light energy was equal to its frequency, multiplied by Planck's constant. Planck used this equation to experiment with thermal radiation. The results show that the energy distribution of light obtained by the experiment was in perfect alignment with Planck's experimental equation. In 1900, at the age of 42, he completed the thermal radiation equation. The study of thermal radiation came to a conclusion here. The great discovery of the quantum hypothesis. Planck, then, thought more thoroughly about the meaning of the formula he had derived, and came up with a hypothesis. This hypothesis stated that there is a minimum unit of light energy, with discontinuous integer leaps in values. Normally, matter can show continuous motion, and take infinite values in between. In the quantum world, however, it takes discontinuous values, that are invariably integers, with no values in between. This means that there is no energy in those gaps. This was an inconceivable result. It is nothing short of amazing, that this is what Buddhism teaches about the momentary generation and annihilation. Everyone has nothing but to pay respect to the wisdom of those who practice dhyana. These startling facts were discovered in the formula Planck had himself created. H nu is called Planck's quantum hypothesis. In other words, the interval between jumps in energy is h nu, and energy is exchanged with a bundle of energy, h nu, as its unit. This bundle of energy was named a quantum, and it is from this that quantum mechanics was born. Quantum mechanics is the discipline of studies of jumps in bundles of energy. This was a great discovery, heralding a new era for physics, because it captured the energy of light as a collection of particles. The same principle was later discovered in electrons, the basis of electricity, which formed the foundation for modern electronics. This discovery has been used in many fields, including computers, and modern society would not exist without it. Planck's great discovery certainly laid the foundation for future quantum computers. In 1913, at the age of 55, Planck was appointed president of the University of Berlin. As soon as he was appointed, he welcomed Einstein as a professor. This was because Planck had long held Einstein's talent in high regard. Einstein recognized and respected Planck's abilities, to the extent that he said to Lise Meitner, who was employed as Planck's assistant, "I envy you." A host of scientists assembled under Planck's leadership, beginning with Einstein, then others joined, including Otto Hahn, who later discovered nuclear fission, and Max von Laue, known for his analysis of X-rays. This was because Planck was a man of noble character. His hatred for injustice, and way of living honestly, and unpreoccupied by popular reputation, charmed everyone he came into contact with. Berlin, where Planck and many other scientists gathered, became a true center for the study of physics. He was also well respected by the public. His hobbies were mountain climbing and music, and his skill with the piano would put professionals to shame. At the end of World War I, at the age of 60, he was awarded the 1918 Nobel Prize in Physics, in recognition of his achievement with the quantum hypothesis. As mentioned above, 5 years after Planck's discovery, Einstein made revisions to the quantum hypothesis. That is, he announced that there are no quanta of energy, but rather light quanta, photons, in light energy, and that groups of light quanta are transmitted in the form of waves. This is the famous theorem, that light is simultaneously a particle and a wave. It is the light quantum hypothesis, for which Einstein was awarded the Nobel Prize. This too was later to be corrected by Niels Bohr. Planck's formula was perfect, however. In the 1910s, Bohr was to further advance Planck and Einstein's quantum theory, discovering that electrons also have the properties of particles. This discovery took hints from Einstein's theory, that photons are particles. Influenced by this, Louis de Broglie completed his quantum theory of particles of matter, which was to influence Erwin Schrödinger's wave mechanics. With the discovery by Erwin Schrödinger and Max Born, that electrons have wave properties, and their work in the 1920s, that decade was probably the most active time for quantum theory. 100 years have passed since, but these discoveries continue to shine brightly even today. Schrödinger's wave function became the most important equation in quantum mechanics. The nature of quantum waves was still unknown at the time, but Niels Bohr and his colleagues published their probabilistic interpretation of matter waves, which was fiercely opposed by Einstein and others, who regarded quantum waves as substantial. The great controversy over wave packet collapse, which states that a quantum does not appear anywhere, until viewed by an observer, is particularly famous. "So you wish to say that the moon doesn't exist, when you're not looking at it," said Einstein, irritated by the Copenhagen interpretation. However, this controversy ended with Einstein's defeat. God does not play dice. This is another famous quote from Einstein to Bohr et al. Einstein clung to the unified field theory in his later years, but died leaving it incomplete. The enigma of the quantum world, which even the genius Einstein, who founded quantum theory together with Planck, and propelled physics forward with his epoch-making theory of relativity, was unable to understand, has been postulated as the background to the anthropic principle. Similarities to Indian philosophy. However, this enigma also seems to hark back to the days of Greek philosophy. Modern physicists cleverly do not call it God, however. This is because their pride as physicists does not permit them to do so. So they came to term it cosmic will, or cosmic consciousness, etc., but this was the very same concept as the pure spirit, taught by the Vedas. In fact, it has been known for a long time, that theoretical physicists, particularly those working in cosmology and quantum theory, have studied the thoughts of the Vedas, Indian philosophy, Buddhism, Lao Tzu, and Zhuangzi as reference works. Incidentally, this is also the case for most modern philosophers. We can find concepts such as the Kiseken, Bhyana Loka, physical world, muga, anātman, selflessness, bonpu, pratītyasam, ordinary people, and ontology that can be considered to be clearly influenced by Buddhist philosophy, in such ideas of Heidegger, regarded as the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, as being in the world. Seinsverständnis, understanding of being. Transcendence. Dasein, presence, and das Man, the people. It seems to me, that Wittgenstein's famous philosophy of, that whereof we cannot speak, thereof we must remain silent, which has exerted great influence in 21st century philosophy, was also influenced by the teachings of the Buddha, who gave non-answers of Mukhi and Shachi, in response to metaphysical questions, and Buddhism's teaching of selflessness, and I have my doubts about calling him a leading figure. Indeed, the subject of the anthropic principle was precisely the central concept of the Vedas, which refers to a pure spirit. More likely, they might say that they had an antecedent in Greek philosophy. In other words, the subject of the anthropic principle was what Aristotle termed ilum, which the ancients considered to be the primary substance, about which matter formed. In 1931, the Belgian Jesuit priest and astronomer Father Lemaitre published Cold Big Bang Theory. While on the other hand, one of the proponents of the later Big Bang Theory, the Russian George Gamow, proposed Hot Big Bang Theory of the universe, gave the name ilum to the cosmic form of the Big Bang's superdense, superhot mass. Lemaitre called it the cosmic egg, as it is described in the Vedas. Now, let us return to the story. Dicke et al., of the anthropic principle theory, believed from hints from observed measurements of the quantum, that cosmic will created humans to understand itself, but no matter how physicists cover it up, this is none other than a modern version of the book of Genesis in the Bible. Surprisingly, his theory would gain the support of many of his peers. Moreover, since the publication of an even stronger paper by Brandon Carter in 1974, the number of its supporters has continued to grow, with each passing year. In other words, many physicists are, in fact, not atheists. Dicke et al. Went on to argue that the universe was designed to create man, with Dick's theory becoming known as the weak anthropic principle, and Carter's theory, the strong anthropic principle. This holds that it is inevitable that the universe was brought to its present state. The cosmic consciousness they advance can also be interpreted as a cosmic life force. In that case, this would imply the Tao of Eastern philosophy. The concept in this case refers to the state of a released cosmic consciousness. It does not refer to the pure spirit before release. The difference between the two must be clearly understood.